Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the life of Peter, and we're in Acts chapter 15 today. So recently, we've seen Peter um, instructed by God through the vision that God sent to him, instructed by God to go preach the gospel to a Gentile, to a centurion in Caesarea, Cornelius, which he does in Acts chapter 10. We've seen him say that he's come to a realization that he understands now that what he preached on the day of Pentecost, that the gospel call was for all who are far off, meant all who are far off, not just Jews. We had a wonderful event there. And then in chapter 11, there was the backlash in Jerusalem. There has already formed a party of people who are zealous for forcing Christians to keep the law of Moses, and he has to answer to them. And he does so quite respectfully and without confrontation, really. Makes his explanation, and it's good enough in the moment. We talked last time that we were together that that event was the backlash was as much about table fellowship as it was about baptism. Well, a lot, and then we saw him taken by Herod after the execution of James, son of Zebedee, and his rescue by the angel, and that he left. Um, where did he go? That's a good question. Maybe he went to Antioch. Eventually, he did end up in Antioch, something that Paul writes about in the Galatian letter. And we're going to be looking at that next time. At some point, Peter ended up in Antioch, and Peter, when some from James arrive at Antioch um, and have the opinion that Jews and Gentiles should not share table fellowship, Peter, who has been fellowshipping with everybody, um, Peter, and we'll talk about this next time. Peter starts hanging out at the Jewish table, only with the Jewish Christians, and Paul has to confront him about that. Did that happen before the events of Acts chapter 15 or after the events of Acts chapter 15? I don't know. I really don't. I've had both opinions, and I've held both opinions fairly strongly. I most recently, and for the longer period of time, believed that Galatians is the earliest book written of the New Testament, and that Paul was writing before the meeting in Acts chapter 15 took place. But I'm not so sure now. So we're going to do these first Acts 15 today, and then next time we'll look at Galatians 2. So, Paul and Barnabas have had this amazing work in Antioch. It's an organic work. It springs up without any apostolic planting, and it explodes. Christians are there. Most of the Christians there are Gentile Christians. Antioch is a big manufacturing town, very robust economy, large population. It's Detroit in its heyday, um, and the church is just going gangbusters there. The apostles send Barnabas. He has such a good work that he goes and finds Saul of Tarsus, and finds him back home in Tarsus and gets him to join the work there. That's great, except for the fact that some people from Judea were part of this uh, 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 um, um, faction, this party that's already arisen to enforce Mosaic law keeping, show up, try to force the people up there to keep the law of Moses. And this is what happens. Some men came down from Judea and began teaching the brethren, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. And when Paul and Barnabas had great dissension and debate with them, the brethren determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain others of them should go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders concerning the issue. Therefore, being sent on their way by the church, they were passing through both Phoenicia and Samaria. Phoenicia doesn't exist as Phoenicia anymore, really. I mean, it is a Roman a province and area, but it's not the ancient Phoenician nation. We're talking about Lebanon, Tyre, Sidon. We're talking about that area. So they're traveling by land. In other words, and Samaria, which is modern day Syria, and then Samaria, north of Judea, um, describing in detail the conversion of the Gentiles, and were bringing great joy to all the brethren. And when they arrived in Jerusalem, they were received by the church and the apostles and elders, and they reported all that God had done with them. But certain ones of the sect of the Pharisees who had believed stood up, saying, "It is necessary to circumcise them and to direct them to observe the law of Moses." And the apostles and elders came together to look at this matter. Now, we're going to stop there, or we will go another 12 minutes. And I've already taken up 6 minutes of your time. But I want to introduce this. So what has happened is these people who were in a snit, and if that sounds judgmental, it is. People who were in a snit in Judea, Jerusalem, and Paul calls such people the party of James. James, the brother of Jesus, James, an elder in Jerusalem, James that we know well from history, and James that we know from the book of James and also from the book of Acts, that they were there trying to make all of these Gentile Christians in Antioch, many of whom had no knowledge of Judaism, try to make them conform to the law of Moses. The brethren, instead of just arguing it out there and coming to their own conclusions, because they don't have New Testaments yet, do what they ought to have done, was to send everyone down to talk to the apostles in Jerusalem, where most of the apostles were still. Not just the apostles, but the apostles and the elders. One would suspect that they have their own elders, but they do. They go and talk. And it is this meeting that is going to be pivotal. And we're going to see something about the role Peter plays. And we're going to see something about Peter's role in relation to the role of James in the city of Jerusalem. And a bit of a changing of the guard, which has clearly taken place by the end of the book of Acts. Okay, we're going to pick up there next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.